Seriously, have you ever noticed just how paranoid the religious actually are? The whole world is out to get them. It's a war on Christianity. Yet the real problem here isn't the world. It's the religion. It's the mindset. It's the utter insanity of the religious believer. And that's why we're about to visit an old friend. Friend in quotes, of course. It's been a long time since I looked at STR, but it's things like this that bring me back. Today, Greg Koukl tries to convince an audience that everyone is out to get them, and they need to be even stronger fanatics than they are if they are to be worthwhile Christians. No, actually, you need to knock that off, Greg. It's childish. Grow the hell up. Yet they won't, because this is all about feelings, not facts, and that's nothing to be proud of. Greg might be a laughable joke, but sometimes even laughable jokes can be potentially dangerous. So let's go see an example.
In any event, on this notion that we're dangerous, as the smoke still billowed from the wreckage of World Trade I and II, Thomas Friedman, New York Times writer, wrote an article called The Real War. And in this particular article, he claimed that the real war that we are fighting now is not a war against terrorism. Terrorism is just a means to an end. The war is against something else, what he called religious totalitarianism.
And to a certain degree, I suppose he's right. Because a lot of religions, not all by any means, but a lot of them, including fundamentalist versions of Islam and Christianity, they want to be in charge. They think they deserve to be in control. They get to make the rules because they've been blessed by their imaginary friend, and therefore they're better than everyone else. And that's why the church was so powerful for so much of human history. Because they were the mouthpiece of God, and they got to tell everybody what to do. Unfortunately, we saw how that turned out. Not well. It's why it can't be allowed to happen ever again. But the religious miss that kind of inherent political and social control that they once enjoyed, so you find lots of them out there screaming that they deserve to be back in power so they can make everyone just like they are. You know, kill the heretics. If you're not like us, you're against us, and therefore you need to be destroyed. And that's a very dangerous worldview to have.
Now, what is religious totalitarianism? Simply put, it is any religious view that thinks its view is correct.
No, not precisely anyhow, although that is certainly part of the view of a religious totalitarian. Religious totalitarianism is the desire to take your views and impose them by force on others. Look at what goes on in much of the Middle East, where Islam is forced on everyone, whether they believe it or not. In fact, if you don't believe it, often you're beaten or killed because your apostasy is seen as a personal insult to believers and to the religion itself. They can't allow anyone who doesn't believe their shit to exist, so whack, whack, whack go the machetes, and off comes the non-believer's head. This comes down to the oft-recognized idea that everyone is just like they are, even when demonstrably they're not, and the nail that stands out most must get hammered down. Nobody gets to disagree, because without disagreement, there is no fear. Nobody has to be afraid that they just might be wrong. There's just a lot of other things to be afraid of, which we'll get to in a minute.
Any religious group that teaches an exclusivist view of religion, those people are dangerous. Now, was it true of the people who flew those planes into the Twin Towers and into the Pentagon and into the field in Pennsylvania? Did they think their religion was correct? Sure. But that's also true about virtually everybody in this room.
But you're missing the point, Greg, which I guess is hardly a surprise. Greg tends to miss just about every worthwhile point out there. It wasn't just that they thought their beliefs were true. It was that they wanted absolutely everyone else to believe what they believed, or else. It's the or else part that really matters here. There's a big difference between saying, I wish everyone believed what I believe, but I understand that's unlikely to happen, and everyone is going to agree with me, or I'm going to kill them. There are a lot of religious groups out there who absolutely go in for the latter part, and those are the people we need to worry about, especially if they get political power. I mean, people like Steven Anderson, they're laughable jokes right up until they get the influence to put their teachings into effect. There are places where Islam has exactly that. There are places where Christianity has that, and all of these places, you wind up with a lot of dead non-believers. This is a problem whether they like to admit it or not.
And who sit in churches around the country every Sunday morning. They think their religion is true too. What Thomas Friedman did is he lumped all fundamentalists together. Never mind that the Christian fundamentalist likely would pray for your salvation, where the Muslim fundamentalist would likely kill you. And we've seen lots of examples of that since then. But this is a distinction that he didn't make.
Because Greg is trying not to talk about the Christians who want to kill you too. Because go look at Africa. There's a lot of Christian fundamentalists there who will kill you dead if you dare to disagree with them. He's real quick to throw another religion under the bus, and I'm not saying he's wrong because he's not, but he ignores his own side when they do it too. Because he doesn't really care. He's fine to kill the infidels in the name of his God, just not his side when they fail to believe in the local majority deity. And this goes back to what I was saying before. It isn't enough to just be part of the same religion, because once they wipe out the opposition, these groups tend to go after their own. You're just not enough of a Christian to survive. Your beliefs aren't strict enough to avoid persecution. Oh wait, you're a Catholic? Die! Hold on, you're a Protestant? We're gonna kill you. The history of Christian war on other Christians is very long and very, very bloody. It doesn't actually make anything better. Everyone still has to be terrified that maybe, just maybe, their Christianity isn't quite Christian enough. Because we see that with Islam all the time. Violence between the Sunnis and the Shiites, that's been going on for centuries, and there are lots of smaller fringe groups who've been fighting to survive for just as long. Murder in the name of your God is a tried and true religious tactic, whether Greg likes it or not.
A fundamentalist is a fundamentalist. If they think they're right, they're dangerous. Now, I presume that whatever views that Thomas Friedman has about religion himself, he thinks they're right, which is why he holds the views, which would mean by his own definition he'd be a fundamentalist who's dangerous as well, but never mind that.
Never let it be said that Greg Koukl didn't understand a rational and nuanced viewpoint, because I don't know that he's ever understood one in his life. He's just looking for an idea that he can sell to a paying audience, which is why he's up there on that stage in the first place, isn't it? But the religious, as a whole, tend to be very paranoid. Everyone is out to get them, and people like Greg, they can make money by pushing that narrative. Everyone is afraid because everyone is going to come and take you away. But don't you think that if anyone was going to take the religious away, it would be the people who are standing up in front of an audience making the most noise? Don't you think those people would go first? You know, people like Greg Koukl. But he's still there, isn't he? Almost universally, that's true. The ones who are out there preaching doom and gloom always have their hands out, but they're always still there. no one has come to cart them away. They're still out there preaching to packed houses, telling everyone that they're in danger. Yeah, funny how that works.
That requires a little consistency in thinking here, which is not characteristic of these kinds of challenges. The point I'm making is the same theme keeps being repeated everywhere I go, and that is we are the enemy. And sometimes this is subtle and sometimes it's explicit, which puts any church committed to participating in the Great Commission directly in the crosshairs of the spiritual battle.
That battle you can't prove actually exists, right? This is just playing into the abject paranoia that a lot of theists have. And why does this exist? Because it makes money. It gets the people preaching the message the power and capital to keep on preaching. They don't go broke preaching fear. It's the same reason that the second they start claiming someone wants to shut them up, they get an influx of cash so they can keep going and spreading the good news. Sure. Well, what's their impetus to stop preaching doom and gloom then? It works. It's not true in virtually all instances, but it gets the audience pumped up and it gets them to open their wallets, so why not keep going? Yet it also increases their paranoia, and that's where you get armed religious militias. You know, people who are terrified of losing their faith, so they stock up on ammo and dare anyone to come at them. The Christian identity movement and the Christian patriot movement are both infamous for this. Get yourself a compound and a bunch of guns and dare anyone to come and stop you. Which usually someone has to, because these groups stop following the law. And that's another problem with a lot of these groups. They think they're magically special, and therefore human law doesn't apply to them. And they're just wrong.
So there's trouble in the world. Trouble from the outside. But there's also serious trouble on the inside. And here I want to be very careful because on the one hand, you don't want to beat up the bride. The bride of Christ. On the other hand, there are serious concerns that have to be addressed for us to be a proper bride. Paul wrote in Colossians 2:8, he says, "See to it that no one takes you captive through philosophy and empty deception, according to the traditions of men, according to the elementary principles of the world, rather than according to Christ."
Except that doesn't actually exist. This is really where the religious mind control and mind poison comes into view. The stuff they believe, it isn't real, not demonstrably anyhow. It's all in their heads, but they're so damaged by their theology that they're incapable of understanding the difference between factual reality and religious fantasy. Because, as I keep saying, they just don't care. They're crazy and they're paranoid, and that's not a good combination. They're crazy and they're paranoid and they're unfortunately expansionistic, which is even worse. They are dedicated to spreading their craziness to the world, and they are convinced that they're right, even though every shred of evidence that we have says otherwise. But they don't care about that because, fee-fees. We know that part, and they have people like Greg trying to whip them up into a frenzy so he can make money. Is it any wonder that there are so many religious problems in the world? Is it any surprise that rational people are concerned with where things are going? We should be concerned because these are not intelligent people that can be reasoned with. These are fanatics, convinced we're coming to get them, and people like Greg are just facilitating that belief.
Paul made it clear that there are two ways to see reality: God's way and any other way.
Reality and fantasy. This is what happens when you're a delusional idiot without any interest in objective fact. You get Greg and his band of idiots. You get Jim Baker, who got caught for the religious scam he was pulling, put in prison, and now he's back on the street as a prepper lunatic trying to sell food packs to his followers because they're coming to get us. This is not hard to see if you've just got your eyes open, which is why the religious shysters want to keep their followers blind. Keep your nose in the Bible so you don't notice the man behind the screen. You know, the one robbing you blind. And if anyone else was doing this for any reason other than religion, they'd be in jail. They really would. But religion is a scam that exists because too many people in society want it to. Everyone is terrified to lift a finger to do anything about the con men. Why? Because religion gets an unjustified pass, and that really needs to stop.
And there's a whole multiplicity of other ways that people are following. And Paul's saying, don't be taken captive by that. Be careful. We're in the midst of a culture. We're immersed in it. It's hard to get immersed in it in a lake and not get wet. By the same token, we are going to collect something from our culture, but we also have to be very careful that it does not corrupt and pollute our true understanding of reality. And that's the warning. And unfortunately, this is something the church has not been very careful of.
Because who cares about reality, right? These teachings, whether anyone likes them or not, are dangerous. They may not cause the religious to run out and kill the non-believers. The vast majority are harmless after all, but we know that it does happen. But let's be honest, Greg is a piker in this regard. There's a lot of people out there that are worse, but now that you see the kinds of things that he's saying, it might sound bad, but he's actually kind of tame. He's just a con man. He isn't building an army. There are people out there who do. You know, the David Koreshes of the world. People like that. It's just hard to go after the bad actors when all of them are doing largely the same thing. And the second you descend on one group for going over the line, all of them whine that you're coming after them. It's why, following 9/11, when we went after the terrorist groups, Muslims the world over started whining that we were all going after Islam. No, they don't understand the difference between a religion and terrorism, and they don't care. After Waco, there were Christian groups screaming that this was the beginning of the end for Christianity. How the hell do you fight this? It's really pretty difficult.
Christian lives are not, I think, characteristically informed by a robust Christian worldview. Oftentimes they have the right pieces of the puzzle. They have particulars and details. They haven't put it together to see the big picture. And this makes them vulnerable.
Yes, it makes them vulnerable to people like Greg. Now, keep in mind, Greg, as I said, is a piker. He's a rank amateur compared to the real nutballs, and he's only in it for the money. That doesn't mean we shouldn't address his abuses, and I do see all of this as absolutely abusive, but the chances he'll be leading a Christian jihad are minimal at best. He isn't going to risk his own ass. That doesn't mean that he won't encourage others, passively, to risk their own. It's why he's trying to get his followers out on the street to bring in more suckers. There's a distinct profit motive behind it all. Anyone who doesn't see that, and I don't understand why you wouldn't, but anyone who doesn't is completely blind.
Sometimes they don't know the particular details. Sometimes there's just almost nothing there but religious affections and religious language and religious activities, but no depth in understanding.
It's because it's all nonsense, and that's why it's important. Not just to not believe this crap, but to actively oppose it when it comes up. I think there's a very distinct lack of commitment among a lot of YouTube atheists. They want to treat them with kid gloves and soft language and pat them on the head rather than tell them the unvarnished truth. And I think that kind of behavior is potentially dangerous in the long run. No, your random theist off the street is unlikely to become violent, at least in the Western world, But in groups led by people like Greg, or worse, mostly worse, those people have the potentiality to act on their irrational beliefs. And even if they don't, the more people we have believing unsupportable things, the worse it is for everyone. And that's why I've always opposed irrationality and stupidity wherever it hides. I'm not going to pretend it's okay for people to be dumb. I can't stop them, and neither can you, but it's important to point it out in the strongest possible terms so that other people can see what's actually going on. And that, I think, is the biggest problem that we face, because most people have grown up around religion and other irrational positions, and they don't really pay it any mind. It's just there because it's always been there. It will always be there so far as they're concerned. Yet, we need to be doing our best to eliminate it. People need to be smarter than they are, more rational, more intelligent, more critical and skeptical. We see these things going on in the world all the time, and we wonder, how can anyone possibly be that dumb? And this is why. We're not saying enough. We're not pointing out the problems. We're afraid to stand up and be counted among the rational and skeptical, and that's what gives the irrational and clueless a foothold. It's why they're still out there. It's why there should be a movement against stupidity. Because it's stupid. Because it's harming us all. Because humanity ought to be better than that. It's really time for people to grow the hell up and stop being mindless children. The sooner that happens, the better. What's going on right now, it isn't helping anyone. How can we get better if people refuse to take a stand? It's time to man up. Who's with me?